Hello and welcome to another AIC video. For years and years, I have recommended to everyone I know that when they need to buy a laptop, new, used, or otherwise, that they should at least seriously consider buying a ThinkPad. It is an easy recommendation for the price/quality. I think it is the correct choice for most people. After a few weeks of using this MSI GS66 Stealth, my opinion hasn't really changed. Whenever you're buying something used, cars, computers, sofas, etc., you always have to ask yourself the question, why is this being sold? And with the ThinkPad, along with other business class laptops like an EliteBook or a Precision, they are bought by the thousands by corporate buyers and then offloaded on the used market once a contract is up. So there are tons of lightly used 3 to 5 year old laptops on the market, usually at a price that makes sense. Gaming laptops like this MSI are a bit different. Typically they're bought one by one. Usually they are a bigger investment for an individual, and they use them until they are used up or start having some major issues. They are also built different, but that doesn't mean built better. They are designed to extract as much performance from the hardware while sacrificing longevity and durability. They are often more experimental in design, whereas business class laptops, like ThinkPads, usually evolve in small increments one generation to another. So what are we looking at with this GS66? Spec-wise, we have a Core i7 1075 or 750H. We have a total of 32 gigs of RAM. I did upgrade this from the 16 gigs it came with just because I wanted to give it a fighting chance. And then we have an RTX 2060 mobile. The screen is a 15.6 inch widescreen. It is 1920 by 1080, and it does have a higher refresh rate screen of 144 Hertz. Pretty typical of the time of a higher end screen. It is nice and bright, which I do like. The colors seem to be really accurate. So I like the screen on this laptop quite a bit. Gaming on a laptop, I think that 1920 by 1080, I do think that gaming on a 1920 by 1080 screen is perfectly acceptable on a laptop, especially because you're not having to drive the higher pixels of a 1440 or even worse, a 4K display. And so you're not having to drop the resolution of the game that you're playing, and so you can play it at the native resolution. And I just think it looks a lot better. It gives you a much crisper look to what you're doing, and the graphics card can run at its best. Right off the bat, there are some issues with the laptop. I recognize that I bought this used, but I feel like this will be a pretty typical experience with buying specifically used gaming laptops. The trackpad, the left click here, doesn't always recognize right there. It doesn't click there anymore. I could sometimes get it if I push really hard, or I have to move my finger to a different spot. On the right side, it works fine. So it's just right here is a dead spot in the trackpad. And I don't have a different touch or pointing device like a track point. Normally on a ThinkPad, this is like a $25 to $30 part. For this MSI, it's about a $200 part to replace the trackpad. I have had this system crash on me a few times when I was initially setting it up. It had a screen tear at one point. That was pretty bad. A few other things. Since getting all the drivers installed, and I did repaste the CPU and GPU, it seems to be a lot more stable, though it runs quite hot, which we'll talk about later. But definitely, I worry about the longevity of this laptop just because of the issues I've already experienced. But sitting at idle, it runs at about 60 degrees plus, which isn't terrible, but it frequently jumps to 90 plus degrees at idle when I don't even have to have anything open. Like I said, I did repaste the system because it was sitting at over 80 degrees before I did the repaste. One of the 3 fans in here does have a bit of a bearing noise. So even when the fans are barely spinning, it's not very quiet. And obviously the laptop was messed with before I got it. In my previous video on this laptop, it was missing screws. Screws were stripped. I did order replacement screws, and so they are all replaced with brand new screws. And so the bottom case is affixed to the bottom of the laptop correctly. So I have a lot of laptops, so I don't need this to be my only system. I bought this specifically, one, to make content with, but to allow my kids to play more video games. They've gotten to a point where they want to play against each other more. My son has a LAN party he wants to do for his birthday coming up. And so I needed a couple of systems that were powerful enough that they could play games over a local network with each other. And so it's not going to get a ton of frequent use. So I'm hoping that it will last a while with that. There are some interesting design choices. Like I said before, it definitely, they put their time into making these things look interesting. I like that this was a 15.6 inch screen, so a little bit bigger of a screen, but it still had a center keyboard. It's far from perfect, however. It's not bad, but it's not great. I don't feel like on a lot of the larger systems where you're off to the side for your keyboard with the number pad over here, but the keypad is slightly off center because of this row here, but the trackpad is centered to the laptop. So if I go to type something, my right hand sits entirely on the trackpad. Normally this would be a fairly big issue for me, but it seems like the trackpad, after I installed all the drivers, does have really good palm rejection, and so it actually hasn't been too big of an issue for me, at least not to the extent that I was expecting. The aluminum chassis feels decently solid. The hinges do have some play in them, but I feel like that has more to do with just the age of the laptop and abuse that it received from the previous owner. But it is heavy enough that when I'm typing, the screen isn't bouncing around like they can do on some lower end systems. Unfortunately though, this anodized aluminum, as you can see, is a pretty terrible fingerprint magnet. I actually cleaned this morning. This is just for me touching a handful of times to get ready for this video. It is absolutely smeared with smudges. I don't know if a different or lighter color might have come in clutch to reduce the look of those smudges a little bit. If it could have been a gray or white, if that would have been better. The keyboard's okay. The stroke is fairly short. They're fairly light. The key caps feel kind of cheap. Also, the layout is kind of weird with a function key here over on the right and a longer control here on the left. Though I kind of get it with the bigger control on the left because that button is used in a lot of games for things like crouching and stuff. So you might want a bigger key there so it can be easier pressed. I do like the full-size arrow keys, especially on a gaming laptop. I do use those with some frequencies in certain games. Another thing that I find a bit odd are the speaker placements. They are here. And so whereas my right hand rests completely on the palm rest when typing, my left hand sits on the speaker, which blocks a lot of the sound out of the left speaker, making it sound fairly unbalanced. Which I guess if you're gaming, you might be able to move your hand for WASD to free up where the speaker is. I would much rather would have had them either downward firing or maybe firing out the sides here so they wouldn't be blocked by your hands covering them. And the sound quality to begin with isn't all that great. Maybe I've just been spoiled with my P1 being just head and shoulders above any other laptop I've reviewed. But they're just mediocre speakers. I'll do a comparison here. All right, so we have music playing. Both are muted right now. Both are set to 40% volume with YouTube maxed out volume. Go ahead and start with the MSI GS66. Switching to the P1. Now, I initially thought that these holes up here were additional speakers, but it's kind of hard to see through the camera. But it's actually additional intake for the fans. You can see the 3 fans here, or see through them, I guess. So it's good that there is additional intake, that you don't have to worry about setting this on a flatter surface and restricting the intake, because this baby gets hot. And the aluminum chassis does translate that into your hands pretty quickly, especially if you have to pick up the laptop after using just the little bit that I've done so far. The bottom of the laptop is fairly uncomfortable. And because of that, as you heard, I'll go ahead and open up A64 here. The fans on this do get pretty loud. And they don't do a great job of controlling the temperatures. So let them ramp up here. And you see already that we get some thermal throttling right off the bat. We'll let this run for a few moments. Now, there are ways to reduce this, but you do have to go in and change your thermal limits. You have to change your fan curves to keep the temperatures in check and avoid the thermal throttling. I am not a fan of that. I don't think I should have to be going in and editing serious components of the system and throttling back the CPU just to keep it within thermal limits of the CPU. I feel like that the design of the laptop should already be able to manage that. And I think it's kind of unacceptable that it doesn't. Now we have this running. You can see this red line is it's showing the thermal throttling. Now, one thing you can do is you can actually make it louder, and it does start to control that thermal throttling a little bit. So we'll let it run here for just a minute. See, the temperatures tend to drop just a little bit more. No, I guess it's not even that effective this time around. The last time I was doing this, it did seem to keep the throttling in check a little bit better. But even with the amount of noise that this makes, it doesn't keep itself cool enough to keep the CPU from throttling. And again, this is with a fresh repaste on this system. Let me go ahead and turn off the jet engine here. We'll stop this. And that's what you get when you're gaming on this system as well. Or if you're in a meeting and you need to like do any kind of work on this, that's what everybody in that meeting gets to listen to. As far as port selection goes, pretty decent over here on the right side. USB-C, HDMI, USB-A. Over on the right side, we have Ethernet, 2 more USB-A, another USB-C, headphone microphone jack. I would have liked to have seen a micro SD card reader, just because that is something that I use fairly frequently, and I like not having to have an adapter. But, you know, it's not a requirement anymore. I know most people don't use those anymore. The battery on this is huge. It's a 99.9 watt hour battery. The largest you can have on like an airplane is a 100 watt hour battery. So, you know, squeaking just under the wire there so that people can use this to fly. I do have it set so that it doesn't charge above 80%, because I do know that this is going to be plugged in most of the time. And so I didn't want to damage the battery by leaving it plugged in and having the battery constantly at 100%. Even with that though, I get 2 to 3 hours of battery life out of this pretty easily. I haven't done a full battery test on this. And also it is now several years old, so the battery is not its freshest. However, pretty decent, not unhappy with the battery life, mostly because of just how big the battery is. And now it's time to look at gaming. How do games actually perform on here? All in all, this is a fine laptop. I probably paid a bit too much for it, about $500 shipped with taxes. My taxes, unfortunately, are really high where I live. It was over $50 in taxes, even through eBay. Looking at a few places, Walmart seems to have the best deal right this second, at least locally, with minimal looking. For about $300 more, I could get a brand new Acer Nitro with an RTX 5050 with an 8 gig memory, video memory, a 16-inch 180 hertz refresh rate screen, and that micro SD card I really want. That seems to be a little bit better value than this laptop was. Even though it's more expensive, it's more money, I have a feeling it's going to be more value. I actually have another laptop coming with very similar specs, so we can kind of look at it spec-wise. Is this a bad laptop? No, it's not a bad laptop. But the issue is you're not getting enough value out of it. It's loud, it's hot, kind of broken. Not going to be easy to repair that broken. And I feel like I overpaid for it a little too much. You can get so much more for not a lot more money. If I was to do this again, I would definitely save up that few extra bucks and then sit on it and sit on some of these websites like Lenovo.com and wait for their sales. I often see the LOQ laptops go for crazy low prices, especially around holidays and big sale days. Walmart often has the same laptop for sale that others do for hundreds of dollars less, so Walmart's a great place to look. Best Buy can be, especially if you find like an open box item. But buy a new gaming laptop. Get your warranty with it, and then once the warranty is up, you start to have some of the small issues, sell it on eBay to a sucker like me. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have an amazing day.